When I was young, I had feared the unseen figures in dark places. I would curl under my blanket, clutching a flashlight tightly and shivering with fear, convinced that monsters lurked just beyond the reach of the light. I assumed my childish fears were nothing more than a creation of my own mind, a figment of my imagination, and that I had moved past them. How wrong I was. It was a stormy night when I found myself alone in an old secluded cabin nestled deep within the woods. The rain cascaded in torrents, creating a symphony of sound that echoed through the trees like a haunting melody. The allure of such a rustic, picturesque setting had faded into an eerie sense of solitude as the daylight dwindled and the shadows began their slow encroachment. Determined to conquer my lingering fear, I pushed aside the gnawing sensation that I was not alone and busied myself with lighting candles and starting a cozy fire. The warm glow provided some comfort, but as the storm kept crashing down, so did the darkness that enveloped the cabin. As I settled onto the worn-out couch, I tried to distract myself with a book. Yet, my eyes kept darting to the corners of the room, where the shadows seemed to gather and dance, their movements taking on sinister shapes and forms. Every creak and groan of the cabin's old wood heightened my unease, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. In hopes of calming my mind, I forced myself to venture into the kitchen to make some tea. The small space was barely lit, and the shadows twisted and swayed, appearing more alive than ever. My heart hammered in my chest, and I hastened my steps, feeling the overwhelming urge to flee from the darkness. Returning to the living room with my trembling cup of tea, I sat back down, trying to regain my composure. But the shadows seemed to grow bolder, creeping closer, and circling me like hyenas hunting their prey. My mind played tricks on me, conjuring images of faces and figures within those ominous shapes. I scolded myself for indulging in such irrational fear. I knew the shadows were merely a result of the flickering candlelight, the product of a frightened psyche. Yet the fear persisted, an inexplicable sensation that gnawed at my sanity. Time seemed to slow down as the night dragged on, and I found myself unable to escape the ever-tightening grip of the dark void. I tried to distract myself, turning on some music, hoping the sound would drown out my rising anxiety. The melody played softly in the background, but the shadows seemed to dance to their own rhythm, unaffected by my futile attempts to escape their embrace. In a desperate bid to break free, I resolved to confront the shadows head-on. I stood, clutching the candle in my trembling hand, and moved toward the darkest corner of the room. The storm outside unleashed its fury, matching the tempest of emotions raging within me. "Show yourself," I demanded. Silence enveloped the cabin, broken only by the relentless patter of rain. I strained to hear anything out of the ordinary, but the shadows remained still, their secrets veiled in abyss. With each passing moment, my courage waned, and I started to doubt the wisdom of my actions. I began to retreat, my feet moving hastily backward, away from the ominous corner. A figure materialized from the shadows, a haunting silhouette that seemed to defy the reality itself. My heart threatened to burst from my chest as I stumbled backward, the candle slipping from my grasp and extinguishing in a wisp of smoke. In the suffocating darkness, the figure moved closer, its presence palpable, its sinister aura suffusing the room with an otherworldly chill. My breath hitched as I realized that I was not alone with mere shadows. I was face to face with something beyond ordinary. Terrified and paralyzed, I could only watch as the figure drew closer, its form shifting and contorting with each step. My mind screamed for escape, but my body refused to obey, rooted to the spot by an ancient fear that had taken hold of me once more. Unable to move, the horror and dread filled my entire being. Despair and hopelessness reached my very soul. It was at the moment it reached for me when, with a flash of a thunder, the figure dissipated back into the shadows, leaving me alone in the dark once more. I stumbled back to the couch, my heart still pounding, and huddled there until morning, when the first rays of light banished the darkness. As the sun painted the cabin with warm hues, I knew that I would never forget that night. The night I faced my deepest fears and came face to face with the terrifying truth that the shadows were not merely figments of my imagination, but the veil that concealed a world I could never fully comprehend. I've always been drawn to the mysteries of the wilderness, finding solace in the untouched beauty of nature. But the encounter that I'm about to recount forever shattered my peaceful perceptions, leaving me haunted by the chilling horror I witnessed in the heart of the forest. It was a crisp autumn evening when I embarked on a solo hiking trip deep into the woods. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows through the dense canopy. The forest floor was carpeted with fallen leaves, and the air carried the scent of decaying foliage. As I followed the narrow trail, the woods seemed to come alive with the fading light. The silence was broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. But soon, even those sounds faded into the background, and an unsettling stillness engulfed the surrounding. I should have turned back, heeded the instincts that whispered warnings in my mind, but the allure of the unknown was too strong, and I pressed on, deeper into the heart of the forest. As the moon took its place in the night sky, the woods became an abyss of darkness. I turned on my flashlight, its feeble beam offering little comfort in the pitch-black expanse. The trees seemed to close in around me, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands, and every rustle of leaves made me jump. In the distance, I heard the faint sound of footsteps, like twigs snapping underfoot. My heart raced, and I quickened my pace, desperate to escape the eerie feeling of being watched. But the footsteps followed me, relentless in their pursuit. I tried to convince myself that it was merely an animal, a harmless creature foraging for food. Yet, as the footsteps grew closer, my fear intensified and my rationality crumbled. Then, just beyond the range of my flashlight, I caught a glimpse of something moving, something that seemed to shift between shadows. My blood ran cold, and a primal fear gripped me. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. A figure, part human, part animal. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a skinwalker, a creature of legend, cursed with the power to take on the forms of animals, or even humans. My mind struggled to process the horror before me, but there was no denying the chilling truth. The creature fixed its piercing yellow eyes on me, its face partially obscured by the darkness. In the moonlight, I could see its contorted form, a twisted amalgamation of man and beast. Its very existence defied the laws of nature, and I knew I was facing an ancient evil that was beyond my understanding. I tried to back away, to escape the creature's malevolent gaze, but my legs were rooted in fear. The Skinwalker let out an unearthly howl, and the sound reverberated through the forest like a haunting lament. It was a cry that spoke of suffering, of ancient curses and forgotten sins. Summoning all my courage, I tore my gaze away from the creature and ran. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pushed myself to the limit, desperate to escape the forest and the malevolent entity that lurked within it. But the woods seemed to conspire against me, the trail twisting and turning in every direction. Panic took hold of me as I realized I was lost, disoriented in the darkness. The footsteps pursued me, drawing closer with each passing moment, and I knew that escape was futile. As I stumbled through the undergrowth, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees reached out with their long, gnarled branches, clawing at my clothes. Shadows danced on the periphery of my vision, and the woods themselves seemed to come alive with sinister intent. In my desperation, I fell to my knees, my breaths coming in heaving sobs. I felt trapped, cornered by an ancient evil that defied all reason. The creature's footsteps drew closer, and I knew that there was no escape from its malevolence. Then, in a moment of desperate clarity, I remembered the legends. The Skinwalkers were bound by certain rules, ancient rituals and symbols that could repel them. With trembling hands, I fumbled in my backpack for a small charm I had bought as a trinket from an old shop. I held the charm before me, its intricate symbols glowing faintly in the moonlight. The footsteps paused, and the creature's form seemed to waver. It let out a guttural growl, as if resisting the power of the charm, but it dared not come any closer. With a trembling heart, I prayed to God for mercy, begging him to provide refuge and strength against the vile beast. The charm's glow intensified, and the Skinwalker let out a final howl of agony before retreating into the shadows. The forest fell silent once more, and the darkness seemed to relent, allowing the moonlight to cast its calming glow. My heart still raced, and I knew that I had faced something ancient and malevolent, something that I could never fully comprehend. With the first light of dawn, I finally found my way back to the trail. The woods had returned to their ordinary, peaceful state, but the memory of the Skinwalker's haunting yellow eyes would forever be etched in my mind. Since that night, I have never returned to the heart of the forest. The legend of the Skinwalkers remains, a chilling reminder that there are forces in this world that defy explanation, and in the dark corners of the wilderness, ancient evils lurk. Deep within the heart of the forest, I roamed, damned to a fate that torments my very existence. My insatiable desire for power led me down a dark and forbidden path. I sought immortality, delving into ancient rituals that defiled the god himself. My lust for power led me to perform the unspeakable, and in doing so, I found what I was seeking and became a Skinwalker. Many moons has passed since I've been cursed, and the price of my sins became evident. With each transformation, I could feel a piece of my humanity slipping away, replaced by something primal and malevolent. The darkness within me grew, and my desires became twisted and sinister. I craved more than just the thrill of the hunt. I yearned for fear, for the suffering of those who ventured into my domain. The urge to taste their flesh and drink their blood became unbearable. I lurked in the shadows, my presence a malevolent force that haunted the dreams of the unsuspecting travelers. As the moon rose high in the sky, I would venture forth, taking on the form of a wolf or a grotesque hybrid of man and beast. The forests echoed with my chilling howls, a haunting lament of the pain that cursed my existence. On that fateful autumn evening, as the sun began its descent, I sensed a lone human intruding upon my domain. Excitement stirred within me as I peered through the trees, watching the intruder follow the narrow trail. There was something different about this one, a sense of curiosity mingled with bloodlust. As the man stumbled through darkness, I observed from the shadows. My piercing yellow eyes fixated on their every move, the smell of fear in their heart and its loud drumming. It fueled the evil within me. He knew he had become a prey, that something sinister is stalking him. A twisted grin formed on my face of nightmares, a cruel response to their vulnerability. When our gazes met, I felt a brief moment of hesitation. I watched as he fled, desperation in his eyes, heart pounding with fear. My instincts compelled me to give chase, to terrify them further, to embrace the darkness fully. A meaningless attempt to run away, and he knew it. Lost and cornered, filled with despair, the man fell to his knees, holding onto a small charm, a totem of protection against malevolence. It was a symbol of hope, of defiance against the evil that I had become. A part of me recoiled from its power, but the hunger that dominated my soul refused to yield. As the moonlight bounced off of a charm, a sense of serenity filled my mind. I remembered, I'm nothing more than a faint echo of my former self, a glimmer of the man once was. I felt the weight of my curse more than ever, and a deep sense of regret washed over me. In that moment of clarity, I saw the cost of my actions. The pain and suffering I had inflicted upon the innocent had given way to a soul-wrenching emptiness. I was trapped in this existence, forever torn between the remnants of my humanity and the malevolence that defined me. I was a creature of abyss, forever haunted by my insatiable hunger for power and my despicable acts. Tormented by the chilling horror I had become, I returned to my hidden dwelling. The forest that was once my sanctuary had become my prison ever since. In the quaint village of Oakshade, Samuel led a peaceful life alongside his beloved wife, Anna, and their young son, Thomas. Their cozy cottage on the outskirts stood as a haven of warmth and joy, a sanctuary where laughter flowed as freely as love. Samuel's mornings were marked by the aroma of freshly baked bread, and the sight of Anna bustling around the stove painted a scene of comfort that words could hardly capture. With a heart full of love and pride, Samuel would tousle Thomas's unruly hair before heading out to the forest. The towering trees greeted him like old friends, and the steady rhythm of his axe cutting through timber was a melody that spoke of his skill and dedication. The tranquility of the forest became a sanctuary, a place where he felt at one with the world around him. As the sun began its descent, casting a warm glow over the landscape, Samuel would return home to the embrace of his family. The sight of his family waiting on the porch would warm his heart. Anna would wrap her arms around him in a loving embrace, her worry for his safety now replaced by the joy of his safe return. Thomas wrapped tightly around his old man's neck, eager to hear new tales of the forest. Evenings were a time of shared comfort and relaxation. Samuel would read to Thomas, introducing him to fantastical stories of heroes and adventures. Anna's gentle voice would fill the room as she sang lullabies to Thomas, her tender touch lulling him into peaceful slumber. Their deep bond and simple joys painted a portrait of contentment, far removed from the looming darkness. Entering the forest was like stepping into a realm untouched by time. Samuel's axe swung with practiced precision, echoing through the woods. Each footstep on the soft carpet of leaves brought a sense of serenity, a feeling of being in sync with the pulse of nature. Amidst the towering trees and rustling leaves, his thoughts often turned to his family, their faces a guiding light through his labor. The forest, with its earthy scent and gentle symphony, was a haven of tranquility. As Samuel continued his routine in the forest, a subtle change began to take hold. Leaves seemed to carry a melody. Trees seemed to lean in, as if confiding secrets. It was as if the very essence of the forest had come to life, a chorus of whispers that danced on the wind. As the days passed, the whispers grew more persistent, their rhythm distinct and deliberate. The forest was trying to communicate, a mysterious language that only he could hear. The words were elusive, carried on the breeze and woven into the very fabric of the woods. Samuel found himself pausing between swings, listening intently, as if trying to decipher a hidden message. The trees' murmurs seemed to be laced with curiosity, as though they were attempting to bridge the gap between the worlds. With each passing day, the whispers that enveloped Samuel in the forest grew louder, more insistent. Samuel's thoughts became consumed by their cadence. He began to see fleeting images at the corner of his vision, shadows that danced on the periphery of reality, shapes that shifted and morphed like apparitions. He would blink, and the woods would return to their serene state, as if the visions had never been. One day, while taking a brief respite beneath the canopy, Samuel's gaze fixed on a gnarled tree trunk. The rough bark seemed to twist and contort, forming grotesque faces that leered at him from the wood surface. He rubbed his eyes, but the images persisted, a chorus of silent watchers that seemed to mock his confusion. These hallucinations were unsettling, yet they were only the beginning. As the whispers grew more pervasive, Samuel began to hear his own name carried on the wind. At times, the whispers seemed to seep into his very thoughts, their meanings elusive, yet haunting. He would awaken in the dead of night, the echoes of the voices still resonating in his mind. These moments of disorientation left him questioning his sanity, his grip on reality, wavering like a fragile thread. Amidst this surreal orchestration, Samuel's bond with the forest grew stronger. The visions and voices intertwined with his encounters, creating a complex fusion of captivation and unease. The woods, formerly a sanctuary of calm, now sheltered enigmas that teetered on the precipice of understanding. As the whispers in the forest intensified, they took on a chilling directive that Samuel couldn't ignore. Amidst the disjointed symphony of voices, a sinister command emerged, carried on the wind like a shadowy promise. The woods seemed to be urging him, a relentless insistence that etched its way into his thoughts. Images began to form in his mind, vivid and unsettling. Faces of villagers he had known for years appeared, their expressions twisted into contorted masks of fear. The voices seemed to merge, their words forming a disturbing chorus that echoed the forest's decree. The very essence of the woods was compelling him to carry out a malevolent purpose. They infiltrated his thoughts with a malevolent force, painting gruesome scenes that seared into his mind. Samuel found himself wielding his axe not against trees, but against those he had known for years. He saw himself committing unspeakable acts, his hands stained with blood, his gaze locked onto the horrified eyes of his neighbors. The forest's whispers, once gentle and alluring, now urged him to embrace the violence, to succumb to the darkness that seemed to envelop the very air. The contrast between the peaceful life he had known and the atrocities he was witnessing became a chasm of despair. His inner turmoil deepened as he fought to discern reality from the nightmarish delusions that seemed to be tightening their grip around his psyche. Weeks went by, and his spirit crumbled. His cherished wife, Anna, her eyes wide with terror, as his own hands clenched around her throat, squeezing and watching the light leaving her eyes. His young son, Thomas, stood before him, his innocent gaze imploring for mercy as Samuel's axe swung down. Once a warm home filled with laughter and joy, now a desolate place painted with his son's blood. The violence of these visions cut through Samuel's heart like a blade, leaving wounds that festered with guilt and horror. He grappled with the realization that the forest's whispers were not just fragments of his imagination, but dark manifestations that seemed to pry at his most primal fears and vulnerabilities. Haunted by the violent visions and tormented by the forest's sinister whispers, Samuel came to a heart-wrenching decision. He realized that the threat he posed to his own family was too great to ignore. The love he felt for Anna and Thomas, the same love that had once been his guiding light, now became the driving force behind his choice to disappear from their lives. His only goodbye, a note saying to stay away from woods. He took his trusty axe and went on a quest, determined to find and destroy the source of his torment. The once peaceful forest had transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. Each step he took felt like a deliberate choice, a conscious push against the tendrils of fear that threatened to coil around his resolve. Days melted into nights, and time itself seemed to warp in the forest's embrace. Samuel wandered amidst the dense undergrowth, his senses heightened as he followed the elusive trail of whispers. The visions that had plagued him didn't abate. Instead, they intensified, each tableau of violence etching itself deeper into his memory. There was an uncanny clarity to these visions, a peculiar lucidity that felt almost orchestrated, as if the very forest was guiding his perception. After days of relentless wandering through the woods, guided by the persistent whispers, Samuel's journey reached a pivotal moment. The forest seemed to exhale a sigh of revelation as it unveiled a clearing. There, amid the twisted undergrowth, stood a weird, deformed tree. As he gazed upon this strange tree, an intense energy surged within Samuel. A fusion of anger, frustration, and determination that had been building within him since the onset of the visions. He felt a mixture of exhilaration and trepidation, like a warrior preparing for a battle that could very well determine his fate. The whispers that had hounded him for so long seemed to crescendo, urging him onward, guiding his hand toward an inevitable confrontation. with a primal roar that seemed to echo through the very soul of the forest. Samuel channeled all the violence he saw in the visions that had haunted him. His grip on the axe tightened, its familiar weight now a symbol of his defiance against the evil that had plagued his mind. The first swing was a cathartic release, an explosion of raw emotion that cleaved into the tree with a ferocity he had never known before. Each swing brought a release of pent-up rage and fear, a surge of power that drove away the uncertainty that had clouded his thoughts. Samuel's actions became a relentless dance of destruction, his axe a blur of motion as it cut through the grotesque forms before him. Samuel felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The visions that had tormented him, the whispers that had pulled him deeper into the abyss, were now met with a fervent response that defied their hold over him. It was a battle not only against the deformed tree, but against the darkness that had threatened to consume his very soul. As the grotesque tree fell beneath his relentless assault, Samuel stood among the wreckage, his chest heaving and sweat-soaked, his senses alive with the scent of victory. With a mixture of exhaustion and triumph, he surveyed the cleared grove, his gaze meeting the remains of the fallen tree. In that fleeting moment of conquest, Samuel started laughing. The laughter was wild and untamed, and the madness that had touched him was one of derangement. As the laughter subsided, leaving only the gentle susurration of the wind, Samuel wiped the blood off his face. He stared at the shattered remains of the cursed tree, his mind struggling to process the implications of what he had done. A sickening knot formed in the pit of his stomach as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Time seemed to warp, the seconds stretching into an eternity as the weight of the truth pressed upon him. A truth more chilling than any he had encountered unfolded before him. His bloodied axe slipped from his fingers as his strength faltered, and he sank to his knees. His descent halted only by the crimson pool that had formed beneath him. A guttural cry escaped his lips, a sound that was equal parts despair and denial. The clearing now felt like a chamber of horrors, his hands trembling as he clutched at his head, as if trying to physically push away the reality that had crashed down upon him. Tears welled in his eyes, as a cocktail of grief and horror painted his gaze, and he leaned down to press a last, trembling kiss onto the lifeless remains of Anna and Thomas. In that heart-wrenching instant, the world seemed to fall away, leaving him adrift in an ocean of remorse and madness. From that fateful moment onward, a shroud of mystery enveloped Samuel's fate. He became an enigma, a figure lost to the world, his presence fading like an ephemeral mist. No one could say for certain what had become of him, for he vanished into the very heart of the forest. Yet, those who venture close may catch faint echoes of his laughter, a haunting remnant of the man who succumbed to the wood's mysterious grasp and the rhythmic swing of an axe, like haunting whispers carried on the wind. I had always been the adventurous type, drawn to the wilderness. When my two closest friends, Alex and Maya, proposed a winter camping trip deep into the uncharted woods, I readily agreed. The snow-laden forest held a serene beauty, but it also concealed secrets, and we were about to uncover one of its darkest mysteries. Our journey began with excitement. the crisp air and the crunch of snow beneath our boots, filling our spirits. We set up camp near a frozen creek, with the towering pines standing sentinel around us. Alex, ever the adventurer, led the way while Mia and I followed, our laughter echoing through the silent forest. On the second day, the weather turned sinister. A relentless blizzard swallowed us whole. The world transformed into a white void, obscuring our path back to civilization. Our tent provided little shelter from the biting cold, and we huddled together, desperate for warmth. Nights in the wilderness are long, and the forest harbors an eerie stillness. It wasn't long before we began to hear it, a distant, mournful howl. We dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on our ears, but it continued, growing nearer with each passing night. As the blizzard raged outside, we listened to the haunting wind howl through the trees, and our once lively laughter turned into fearful whispers. The wilderness that had initially enchanted us now felt like a cold, unforgiving realm that had no intention of releasing its grip. Maya, her face pale and eyes filled with worry, stared at the entrance of the tent as if expecting something to emerge from the snowstorm. I shared her unease, unable to shake the feeling that we were not alone in this desolate wilderness. The relentless storm had isolated us, and the true extent of our predicament was beginning to dawn on us. Maya's unease infected us all. She insisted that something was lurking out there, watching us. Alex, though he teased her, shared her concern. The Wendigo legend crept into our conversations, chilling our hearts. As we trudged through the unforgiving winter wilderness for weeks on end, the feeling of hunger had become an unrelenting torment. It was a gnawing ache that clenched at my stomach, a hollow emptiness that seemed to stretch on endlessly. Each step I took, each breath I drew, only served to intensify the desperate craving for sustenance. My senses were attuned to every movement in the snow as I searched desperately for any sign of food in this frigid wasteland. The biting cold and the relentless hunger had become my constant companions, driving me to the brink of desperation in this desolate winter realm. We were lost, and our search for food had led us further into the heart of the woods, and our hope waned with each step. The bone-chilling cold gnawed at our stomachs, and we grew weaker by the day. It was then, amidst the twisted trees and falling snow, that we stumbled upon the gruesome sight. A clearing opened before us, revealing a grotesque shrine that froze the blood in our veins. The remains of animals, and even what appeared to be human bones, were carefully arranged in a horrific display. Some were suspended from the trees, others piled upon makeshift altars, and all of them bore the unmistakable marks of gnawing teeth and claw marks. Our terror intensified as we realized that the legends we had heard might not be mere tales. The Wendigo's presence felt all too real in that eerie, bone-strewn clearing. One night, as we lay in the tent, hungry and tired, we heard the howling that reached a fevered pitch. I unzipped the flap and gazed out, my breath catching in my throat. Amidst the swirling snowflakes, it stood, an abomination of nature, a grotesque amalgamation of bone and sinew. Its skeletal form loomed tall, its limbs unnaturally elongated, its claws eager to tear my flesh apart, and its eyes, those hollow, soulless eyes, seemed to pierce through the very fabric of my being. I could feel its hunger emanating from it, a chilling force that wanted to feast on my flesh. The legend of the Wendigo had become a living nightmare before my eyes, and I knew that there was no escaping the terror that had descended upon us. In my terror, I stepped out of the tent, leaving my friends behind. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the monstrous creature that awaited me, its skeletal form looming closer, its rancid breath mingling with the biting cold, its bony fingers wrapping around my very soul, and I felt a darkness like no other consume me. A darkness that went far beyond the confines of the winter woods and into the depths of something inexplicable and horrifying. The cold, gnarled hands of the Wendigo closed around me, and I screamed, but there was no escape. It tore into me, consuming my flesh with an insatiable hunger. My vision faded as I became one with the Wendigo. And then I awoke, cold, sick, and covered in blood, but alive. Maybe it was all just a dream, even though it didn't seem like it. The campsite was empty, the tent torn to shreds with blood painting its insides. I was alone in the winter wilderness, with no memory of how I had survived or what really happened. My heart sank as I discovered Maya's torn clothes and the gruesome pile of gnawed bones. The forest had become a nightmare, and it was evident that something unspeakably horrific had befallen my friends. With a sense of dread clawing at my chest, I followed the blood trail back to the Shrine of Bones. As I approached the shrine, my eyes widened in horror at the sight of Alex. He was barely alive, his body battered and torn, his eyes wild with terror. He screamed and thrashed as he saw me, his words a frantic jumble of fear and desperation. In that moment, an inexplicable and horrifying craving washed over me, an overwhelming urge to feast. It was a hunger that transcended any human desire, a dark compulsion that I couldn't comprehend. Alex's screams grew louder, and my senses were overwhelmed by the scent of his blood. My vision blurred, and a primal, ravenous instinct took hold of me. At last, my hunger had been sated, but it had left me with a chilling secret, a taste for human flesh. In the depths of the ancient northern forests, where the wind howled through the tall pines and snow covered the land for months on end, there lived a tribe of people known as the Algonquians. They were hardy and resourceful, their lives intricately woven into the fabric of the wilderness that surrounded them. Yet, even the most resilient of tribes could not escape the relentless grip of hunger that clawed at them during the bitterest of winters. One year, the Algonquians faced a winter unlike any they had experienced before. The cold was more biting, the game scarcer, and the snowfall deeper than memory allowed. As the days stretched into weeks and then months, their food stores dwindled to nothing more than a few meager provisions. Starvation became their constant companion, and desperation set in, like a blight upon their spirits. The tribe's elder, a wise and weathered man with eyes that had seen countless seasons, gathered the people around a flickering fire in the heart of their village. He spoke of ancient tales, passed down through generations. Tales of a terrible spirit that dwelled in the wilderness, a malevolent force known as the Wendigo. This spirit was born from the darkest depths of human hunger, he warned, and it possessed those who resorted to cannibalism during times of dire need. Despite the elders' warnings, hunger gnawed at their insides, driving them to the brink of madness. The cries of starving children and the anguished pleas of parents echoed through the night, a mournful symphony of suffering. Days turned into weeks, and still no relief came. It was during the bleakest of nights, when the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the snow-covered landscape, the desperation overcame reason. A young hunter, driven to madness by the relentless pangs of hunger, committed the unthinkable. He took a life, not of a beast, but of a fellow tribesman. As he devoured the flesh of his fallen comrade, an unholy transformation began to take hold. His body contorted, his skin stretched taut over his skeletal frame, and his eyes glowed with an insatiable hunger. The spirit of the Wendigo had claimed its first victim. Tribe awoke to a nightmare. The young man, now unrecognizable as one of their own, had become a creature of dread and despair. He stood tall and gaunt, his limbs elongated, his fingers ending in sharp claws that scraped against the bark of the trees. His breath came out in icy plumes, and his howls echoed through the forest, chilling the hearts of those who heard them. Terrified, the tribe knew that they must confront this abomination before it could wreak havoc upon them all. They armed themselves with weapons forged from bone and stone and ventured into the frigid wilderness. The Wendigo, with its newfound powers, lured them deeper into the woods, its voice mimicking the cries of their loved ones, drawing them further into the abyss. The battle that ensued was a brutal and harrowing one. The Wendigo moved with an unnatural swiftness, its claws tearing through flesh and bone. Yet, the tribe fought with a desperation born of survival, knowing that if they failed, the Wendigo would consume them all. In the end, it was the elder, the same man who had warned them of the Wendigo's curse, who delivered the final blow. With a bone-tipped spear, he pierced the creature's heart, ending its terrible existence. As the Wendigo fell to the ground, its body contorted and withered, returning to the form of the young man it had once been. The tribe returned to their village, their hearts heavy with grief and the weight of the terrible choices they had been forced to make. They buried the young man, performing a solemn ceremony to appease the spirits and cleanse their souls of the darkness that had befallen them. But the memory of that fateful winter would haunt them for generations to come. The legend of the Wendigo served as a grim reminder of the consequences of succumbing to the most primal of instincts, and the tribe vowed never again to let hunger drive them to such depths of despair. My eyes blinked open, and I was met with an intense, blinding white light. My mind was a labyrinth of confusion, with each thought struggling to find its way through the fog of disorientation. I couldn't remember how or why, but I found myself in a pristine hospital bed. An intricate web of tubes, wires, and needles protruded from my body, connecting me to an array of medical machinery that remained dormant. My hands acted instinctively, removing these foreign intrusions from my flesh. Despite the bewildering array of equipment surrounding me, my body felt surprisingly light and strong. There wasn't a single scratch or bruise on me, leaving me to question why I was in a hospital at all. I pushed myself upright and swung my legs over the bed's edge. The cool touch of the tiled floor against my bare feet was oddly refreshing. Sunlight flooded the room, drawing me to the window like a moth to a flame. The world outside was shrouded, in brilliant daylight, yet something felt profoundly amiss. Streets below were devoid of people, roads barren of cars, just a world frozen in time. Questions swirled like a tempest within me, and my thirst for answers intensified with each passing moment. I resolved to venture into the hallway, hoping to encounter someone who could shed light on my situation. Stepping out of my hospital room, my bare feet produced a disconcerting slapping sound on the cold floor. Each step's hollow echo magnified the eerie atmosphere that had clung to me since I woke up. The hospital corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, its white walls and sterile ambience creating an unsettling uniformity. I peered into several rooms as I passed, each one empty and devoid of any signs of life. The beds were neatly made, the machines beside them silent. No patients, no doctors, no nurses. The only sound to accompany my footsteps was the low, persistent buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. But then, a glimmer of hope washed over me as I approached the elevator at the end of the corridor. The silence was abruptly shattered by the familiar ding of its arrival. The doors slid open, and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. With a subdued hum, the elevator began its gradual descent. However, it halted unexpectedly on the very next floor. My heart skipped a beat as the doors slid open once more, and a mysterious man entered. Tall and gaunt, he wore a sleek black suit that clashed starkly with this unsettling environment. His presence exuded cold indifference, yet felt strangely familiar. There was something about him, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on, but it made my skin crawl. I couldn't look away, even though I desperately wanted to. He remained motionless, making no attempt to press any buttons inside the elevator. I cleared my throat and asked, almost in a whisper, "Which floor are you going to?" He offered no response, no acknowledgement of my presence, maintaining his unbroken stare ahead. Desperation began to creep in as I pressed the button for the ground floor once more, determined to reach my destination and escape this stranger's unsettling company. Raising my voice, I inquired, "Where is everyone?" But he remained eerily silent. Each passing second felt like an agonizing eternity. The silence inside the cramped space was stifling, and I longed for the moment when this eerie ride would come to an end. Finally, the elevator reached the ground level. Its mechanical hum ceased, but the doors remained sealed shut. Panic welled up inside me, a rising tide of anxiety engulfing my every thought. I fumbled for the open door button, pressing it repeatedly in frantic desperation, but nothing happened. Each futile press only intensified my panic, and I began to shout for help, crying and begging for someone to open the door. Throughout my panic outbursts, the creepy man remained immobile, as if carved from stone. His demeanor never wavered, preserving an unsettling aura of eerie detachment. Amid my escalating panic and cries, he finally broke his silence. "Not yet. This is not your floor." His voice a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed me. His cryptic words brought a brief moment of serenity amidst the storm. As he spoke, an unexplainable calm washed over me, soothing the overwhelming anxiety that had gripped me. It was a fleeting respite, a moment of peace. But my newfound composure was short-lived, for I soon realized that the elevator was once again descending. How is it possible? Or where are we going? I don't know. It didn't make any sense. Could this be the man's doing? It seemed plausible, given his cryptic message, eerie calmness, and apparent familiarity with this bizarre situation. Desperation welled up in me, and I grabbed the man's arm, hoping to extract some answers. As my fingers made contact, something unexpected happened. I remembered. Memories surged into my consciousness like a tidal wave, overwhelming my senses as I recalled the harrowing events that led me to the hospital. The vivid images flooded my mind with intensity, as if I were reliving every moment. I had been driving home from work, following my usual route, lost in the monotony of my commute. The memory was lively, sunset casting long shadows, the radio softly crooning in the background, and the routine of the road. But then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. Someone ran a red light at a busy intersection, plowing directly into the driver's side of my car. The impact was devastating. The shattered metal and broken glass became projectiles, piercing my body, with shards embedding deep within. Oddly, there was no pain, just warmth of the pouring blood. Amidst the chaotic wreckage, time itself slowed down, and for a brief, inexplicable moment, there was a profound stillness. It was as if the universe had paused, granting me a solitary respite amidst the chaos and destruction all around me. The tranquility was shattered when paramedics swarmed the scene, their voices rising in frantic urgency. Their shouts reverberated in my ears, their loud screams driving me to madness. Blinding flashes of light pierced through the haze, making me dizzy and disoriented. I remained seated in the mangled car, my consciousness teetering on the brink of oblivion. It was at that critical moment, amidst the tumult of voices and blinding lights, that I saw him. A tall, gaunt man in the black suit. The same man who now stands before me. Not yet. Those were the words he said to me before I fell unconscious and then awoke in this hospital. I sank to the elevator floor, overwhelmed by the stark realization that I shouldn't be standing here, unscathed after such a catastrophic accident. In response to my revelation, the elevator abruptly jolted to a halt, and a chilling bell sound marked our arrival. "This is your floor." The mysterious man spoke one last time. The doors slid open with an eerie hiss, revealing a surreal and nightmarish sight. A colossal gate, dark and foreboding, looming like an omen of doom. A mere glimpse of the gate filled me with profound unease, as though I stood on the precipice of an unfathomable abyss. The massive gate slowly creaked open, its ominous groans thunderous enough to topple buildings. A searing heat radiated from the gap, accompanied by a deafening chorus of anguished cries. I stared in horror at the raging flames beyond, flames that seemed to stretch into eternity, consuming everything in their path. The air itself was thick with ash, and an overwhelming sense of dread weighed upon me. Despair settled in my heart, for I knew exactly where I was. With my terrified, tear-welled eyes, I turned to the mysterious man. I found my voice, and with a plea for mercy, I uttered the only words I could. "Not yet." In the heart of a desolate town, shrouded in perpetual mist and forgotten by time, stood the dreaded cemetery known as Mourning Hollow. The air there was always thick with an eerie chill, and the moon rarely dared to cast its light upon the twisted trees and weathered tombstones that adorned the grounds. Local legend told of a family that had once lived in the decaying mansion at the edge of the cemetery. The O'Donnells, as they were called, were rumored to have dabbled in the occult, seeking power that could defy death itself. It was said that their rituals had gone horribly wrong, and a darkness had been unleashed upon Mourning Hollow that could never be contained. As the story went, anyone who ventured into the cemetery at midnight would be met with haunting whispers that would plunge them deep into madness. The voices were barely audible, but their icy words wormed their way into the minds of those who dared to listen, sowing seeds of terror that took root and grew. One fateful night, a skeptical young man named Ethan scoffed at the tales of Mourning Hollow. Brimming with bravado fueled by a few drinks, he accepted a dare from his friends to spend the night among the tombstones. Armed with a flashlight and a heart full of disbelief and drunken courage, he entered the cemetery as the clock struck 12. The moon hid behind a curtain of clouds, leaving the cemetery in near total darkness. The trees creaked and swayed. Tombstones emerged from the darkness like spectral sentinels, and the air grew thick with an otherworldly energy. Ethan's footsteps echoed through the stillness as he navigated the maze of graves, his bravado slowly giving way to unease. He tried to shake off the growing sense of foreboding, reminding himself that the stories were nothing more than the product of overactive imaginations, inflated by passage of time. But then, as if conjured by his doubts, he heard it. A faint, chilling whisper that seemed to come from the ground beneath him. His heart raced, and he swung his flashlight wildly, casting frantic beams of light into the darkness. The tombstones seemed to leer at him, their inscriptions shifting and warping before his eyes. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of anguished voices that filled his head. He clamped his hands over his ears, but the voices wormed their way inside, each utterance a fragment of a tormented soul's story. Ethan's breathing quickened, and his mind began to unravel as he was bombarded by visions of pain and suffering. He stumbled and fell to his knees, his flashlight flickering and dying. The world around him seemed to warp and twist, reality blending with nightmare. Faces emerged from the darkness, their features contorted in agony, their eyes empty voids of despair. As Ethan's sanity teetered on the edge, a voice, a singular, sinister voice, rose above the rest. It hissed promises of power, of forbidden secrets beyond the realm of the living. It promised him eternal life at the cost of his very soul. As each hushed word wound its way into his thoughts, a torrent of brutality and agony cascaded through him. The weight pressed down like an iron vice, every syllable a lash that tore into his psyche. The anguished wails and the vivid scenes they carried surged like a deluge, submerging him in a tempest of relentless suffering. Ethan's shoulders sagged beneath the unrelenting onslaught, a physical burden as much as a mental one. The stories etched onto his mind felt like branded scars, a searing reminder of the tormented souls he was now intricately bound to. With each whispered confession, their pain wasn't just heard. It was lived, a haunting symphony of despair that echoed in the chambers of his own heart. He clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms as if trying to anchor himself against the force of the flood. It was as though the spirit's torment had become his own, the sins perpetrated against them carving a path of torment within his soul. The weight of their anguish settled in his chest, a leaden ache that matched the rhythm of their cries. In this twisted communion, Ethan wasn't a mere observer. He was a vessel for their suffering. He felt their terror in his bones, their helplessness in the trembling of his hands. It was as if he had been thrust into the role of both witness and victim, forced to experience the pain and horrors as if they were inscribed onto his own flesh. The sensations, vivid and unrelenting, seeped into every crevice of his consciousness. His breath became a shudder, his heartbeat a relentless drumming against the unyielding grasp of their stories. The boundaries between himself and those he now carried were blurred, a chilling fusion that left him drowning in a sea of shared anguish. In that moment of terror, Ethan's skepticism shattered. He realized the stories were true, that the O'Donnells' thirst for power had left an indelible mark on the land. With a scream that echoed through the night, he fled the cemetery, his mind forever scarred by the horrors he had witnessed. Ethan was never the same after that night. The whispers haunted his dreams, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the world. He became a recluse, consumed by the fear that the voices would return to claim him. And so, Mourning Hollow Cemetery remained a place of dread, a land where the forgotten dead whispered their tales of suffering and sought to ensnare the living in their eternal torment. Those who heard their voices would forever be marked, destined to carry the chilling whispers with them until the end of their days. The O'Donnell family, once wealthy and respected members of the community, lived in a grand mansion that overlooked the Mourning Hollow Cemetery. The family was known for their obsession with the occult and their insatiable desire for power that extended beyond the boundaries of life. The story of the O'Donnells and the fateful ritual they attempted became the stuff of chilling legends. Generations of O'Donnells had studied ancient texts and arcane manuscripts, seeking forbidden knowledge that promised to unlock the secrets of life and death. It was said that their obsession began when a distant ancestor stumbled upon a cryptic grimoire on his travels in pursuit of mystical. The grimoire contained instructions for a ritual known as the Veil Unbinding. According to the text, this ritual had the power to pierce the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead, granting the practitioner the ability to harness the otherworldly energies of spirits and claim them as their own. However, the price for wielding such power was said to be steep. A debt paid in blood, and the very essence of the practitioner's soul. Driven by their unquenchable thirst for power, the O'Donnells were lured by the promise of immortality and dominion over life and death. They began the meticulous preparations for the ritual, collecting rare and macabre components from all corners of the world. The mansion's halls echoed with incantations and dark rites as the family's obsession consumed them. On a moonless night, shrouded in secrecy and cloaked in shadows, the O'Donnells commenced the ritual in a hidden chamber deep within the mansion. Candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls, adorned with symbols of the occult. The air grew thick with an unnatural chill, and the very fabric of reality seemed to tremble. As the incantations reached a crescendo, A portal of swirling darkness materialized before the O'Donnells. It was a tear in the fabric of existence, a gateway to realms unknown. But the forces they had unleashed were not easily controlled. The ritual took a horrifying turn as malevolent entities crossed into the mortal realm, drawn by the disturbance in the balance between life and death. The O'Donnells' desperate attempts to command these entities only led to chaos and destruction. The mansion shook with unearthly tremors, and the air filled with the anguished cries of the family members. Realizing the magnitude of their mistake, the O'Donnells sought to close the portal, but their efforts were in vain. The mansion became a slaughterhouse. The evil forces they had summoned against their own fading strength. In the end, the mansion was consumed by a cataclysmic explosion of ethereal energy, leaving behind only silence and a darkness that lingered. The souls of the O'Donnells were forever entwined with the malevolent entities they had summoned. Their family legacy was one of tragedy and damnation. However, the eternal life they longed for was given to them in form of a curse. The spirits of the O'Donnells were condemned to wander the boundary between the living and the dead, never resting, whispering their tales of woe and seeking to ensnare the living in their web of torment. The Mourning Hollow Cemetery became a haven for their restless souls, forever haunted by the consequences of their ambition and the ritual that had shattered the fragile balance between life and death. The legacy of the O'Donnells served as a chilling reminder of the dangers of seeking power beyond the natural order and the horrors that could be unleashed by tampering with the unknown. I work as a casino dealer. Usually, we have full house, but there are occasional evenings that are slow, just like that night, so they let me go home early. The problem was, the next bus wouldn't arrive for an hour, and I didn't want to wait that long. A 20-minute walk seemed like a better idea, especially after sitting for 8 hours at the poker table. I couldn't help but appreciate the peacefulness of the deserted streets. There were no annoying crowds, no traffic, just the occasional encounter with someone who had a few too many drinks or had fallen on hard times. People usually steered clear of me, probably because of my imposing stature or permanently pissed off face. No one wants to start trouble with an angry big guy at such a weird hour, so I was sure to be safe. But that sense of security faded when I reached an abandoned industrial complex. It was a grim and silent place. The area had its grim reputation, and I could see why. The eerie stillness was abruptly broken by screeches and hisses. My heart raced until I realized it was just 2 cats messing around. With a sigh of relief, I kept on moving further, trying to find my way to the other side of the complex. But then I heard a deep growl, far too menacing for a cat. I quickened my pace and tried to hurry past. I wanted to get out of there swiftly. I froze when I heard heavy footsteps, slowly but surely closing in on me. I tried to escape, changing directions on every turn, but the footsteps drew only nearer. I hid behind trash cans around the corner, and I carefully listened, but there was only silence. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I noticed a car's headlights approaching. It was the police. I jolted right away and sprinted toward them. As soon as I stepped into the beam of their headlights, a noise came from behind me. The trash cans, the same ones I was near just a mere seconds ago, rattled and screeched as if something heavy had collided with them. I frantically pointed towards the commotion, my eyes locked on the bins. In the dim light, I saw a pair of shiny eyes staring back at me from the darkness. As the police officers emerged from their car, the mysterious presence retreated into the shadows, disappearing from sight. I couldn't get a good look at it, but it sounded hungry and predatory. I shuddered to think what might have happened if the police had arrived a few seconds later. One of the police officers cautiously investigated while the others stayed with me. I recounted my eerie encounter, and the officer called for backup. Eventually, the officer returned with grim expression on his face. The only thing he found were huge claw marks on the metal sheets of trash cans. They gave me a ride home, but warned me to stay away from the area. Apparently, 2 people had gone missing there in the past few days, prompting their patrols. If it weren't for them cruising around the complex, it would already be 3 missing. To this day, nothing has been found in that forsaken place, but rumors persist of people vanishing from time to time. I may never know what I encountered that night, but I have no intention of returning to find out. I never expected that a casual night of celebration with my friend would turn into a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It all began when my friend dropped the bombshell. His girlfriend had said yes to his marriage proposal. To commemorate this joyous occasion, I insisted we head to the nearest casino where we could toast to his newfound happiness. The night unfolded just as we had anticipated. A cascade of money spent on whiskey, and even more squandered on games. We reveled in the moments, savoring life's sweetness as the hours passed us by. But as our merriment reached its zenith, the casino staff had seen enough, and unceremoniously ushered us out into the night. We staggered through the darkened streets, 2 intoxicated buddies, high on life, and clutching a half-empty bottle of whiskey. The path we trod, however, led us astray, and we found ourselves within the desolate confines of an abandoned industrial complex. Our laughter suddenly subsided, overtaken by an ominous growl that shattered the silence. Frozen in place, we strained our senses to listen, but all that met our ears was an eerie hush. Then, a solitary footstep, followed by another and another, each one closer and more resonant than the last. Something was advancing toward us. The realization hit me like a splash of icy water, sobering me instantly. Panic overcame us, and we dashed off, attempting to outmaneuver whatever it was that pursued us. We zigzagged through the labyrinthine passages, desperate to shake off our pursuer. Distant growls grew ever closer, each one marking our relentless tormentor's approach. After a series of random turns and twists, we sought refuge behind a row of trash cans. Hearts pounding in our chests. Huddled there, we strained to hear any sign of pursuit. But all we encountered was silence. We listened carefully, but nothing. Have we managed to evade our predator? Relief washed over until an ear-splitting growl erupted right beside me. Before I could even turn my head, I felt an agonizing slash across my face. My world blurred into darkness. Whether from missing eyes or a veil of blood, I couldn't tell. All I could do was listen to the dreadful sounds. My friend's anguished screams fading into the night, replaced by the silence. But then, the creature began moving again, Footsteps approached, each one heavier and more menacing than the last, slow and deliberate. The footsteps halted right before me, and in that moment, a loud bang reverberated. I could discern faint, agonized growls from the creature, and distant shouts amid the persistent ringing. My memories after that point were a chaotic jumble. But when I finally awoke, I was in the hospital. Everything was enveloped in darkness. Bandages covered my eyes, and a doctor informed me that one of my eyes had been irrevocably damaged. Confusion clouded my mind, and it was a stranger who pieced together the puzzle for me. He shared his own harrowing tale. A year earlier, his son had disappeared in this very place, and he had heard rumors of a shadowy beast responsible. No one had ever glimpsed its true form. It always lurked in the shadows. He explained that he comes here every night, hunting the creature, and this was the first time he had taken a shot at it. He jokingly thanked me for being the unwitting bait. His demeanor changed when I inquired about my friend. He confessed that he had shot the creature, even though it had remained hidden in the dark corners and shadows, but it had managed to drag my friend away, and his body had never been recovered. Now, all I can think of is how to face my friend's fiancée and deliver the heart-wrenching news. Guilt gnaws at me. If I hadn't taken him to that casino, we would never have wandered near that forsaken area. The hum of the engine was the only sound that accompanied me, as I drove alone on that desolate road flanked by towering trees on either side. The moon's feeble glow struggled to pierce through the dense forest canopy, casting eerie shadows that danced across the asphalt. A cold gust of wind came in through the window, and a shiver ran down my spine, amplified by the solitude and the whispers of the night. As my headlights sliced through the darkness, something caught my eye ahead, an ethereal figure standing in the middle of the road. She was adorned in a flowing white dress that billowed around her like a mist. The contrast between her pale complexion and the night was stark. An otherworldly presence, bathed in an almost supernatural radiance. Curiosity took hold of me, and I found myself easing my foot off the gas pedal, my heart racing as I approached her. The sight was mesmerizing. Her long, ebony hair cascading down her back, her lips a soft shade of rose, and her eyes, large and dark, seemed to hold the secrets of the universe. She was like a mirage, a haunting beauty that tugged at the depths of my soul. The rational part of me cautioned against stopping. After all, it was late, and the setting seemed ripped from the pages of a horror story, but the allure of her beauty was irresistible, a siren's call that beckoned me closer. I pulled over, my heart pounding with anticipation and uncertainty. With cautious steps, I approached her. At first, she appeared pure and untouched by the malevolent darkness that can dwell in such secluded places. Her smile was warm, inviting, a beacon of comfort in the inky blackness. The air was still, almost as if the world held its breath. As I drew nearer, a chilling transformation began. Her radiant countenance started to warp, her features contorting into something sinister. The once inviting smile twisted into a sneer, and her eyes glowed with an unholy light that sent a shiver down my spine. Every inch I closed between us seemed to unveil a deeper malevolence. Fear clawed at my chest, urging me to turn and flee, but I was paralyzed, ensnared by her otherworldly magnetism. The very ground beneath me seemed to shift, a tangible current of malefic energy that pulsed with each heartbeat. Her once white dress began to fray and decay, turning into tattered rags that barely clung to her corrupted form. As if under a spell, I took another step, and with it, the facade of beauty shattered completely. Her skin twisted into an ashen hue, mottled and marred by grotesque deformities. Her eyes elongated into obsidian voids, and her mouth split into a gaping maw lined with jagged teeth. What was once enchantment had morphed into a nightmare. My senses returned to me in a rush, and I stumbled back, a scream caught in my throat. My heart thundered in my chest as I spun around and sprinted toward my car. Panic fueled my movements, and I fumbled with the keys, struggling to unlock the door. Finally, I flung myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. As the engine roared to life, I risked a glance at the rearview mirror. There, on the road, stood the monstrous figure, a chilling embodiment of horror, its malevolence seeping into the very air around it. With trembling hands, I gripped the steering wheel and sped away. The memory of the once beautiful lady in white, now forever tainted by the nightmarish transformation I had witnessed. That night, as I left that forsaken road and the cursed beauty behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a fate far worse than any darkness the forest held. A reminder that not all that glimmers is gold, and that sometimes the most seductive horrors are the ones that lure you in with a haunting, irresistible allure. In a village draped in the enchantment of old tales and whispered secrets, there lived a girl named Seraphina. Her beauty was a force of nature, captivating the hearts of all who gazed upon her. With hair as dark as midnight and eyes that held the secrets of the universe, she possessed an allure that seemed to cast a spell over those in her presence. Seraphina's beauty was a double-edged sword. She was possessed by an insatiable desire to be the fairest of them all, her soul consumed by a toxic obsession with her own appearance. As envy gnawed at her heart, she began to harbor a sinister secret. She could not bear the thought of anyone being more beautiful than herself. Girls who possessed even a glimpse of beauty beyond her own were marked for doom. They would disappear, their bodies found in the depths of the forest, their once vibrant lives snuffed out by Seraphina's jealousy. The village whispered of her chilling deeds, but fear and fascination kept them from confronting her. One ill-fated day, Seraphina's dark desires led her to commit an act that would change her destiny forever. She encountered a village girl named Isolde, a breathtaking beauty with an innocence that radiated from within. Consumed by her envy, Seraphina's jealousy spiraled out of control. The curse that had taken root in her heart drove her to commit a heinous act. She took Isolde's life, ending the delicate existence of a girl who had done nothing to deserve her fate. Isolde's death sent shockwaves through the village. Among those who grieved for Isolde was a powerful warlock named Darien. Isolde had been his betrothed, a beacon of light in his dark world. Her death shattered his heart, and in his grief, he turned to dark magic for vengeance. Darien's power was unlike any the village had seen. He cast a curse upon Seraphina, twisting her beauty into a horror that would reflect the darkness of her heart. her once radiant appearance transformed into a spectral form, the lady in white. Her skin grew pale as moonlight, her eyes became hollow voids, and her once lustrous hair turned ashen. Bound by the curse, the lady in white was condemned to roam at night, a vengeful spirit forever haunted by her own jealousy and the lives she had taken. She was now a harbinger of sorrow, a chilling reminder of the price of vanity and the dangers of envy. The village lived in fear of the lady in white, her presence casting a pall over even the most joyous occasions. Her story was whispered by the fireside, a haunting tale of a girl consumed by her own desires and a warlock's curse that sought to balance the scales of justice. The legend of the lady in white endured, serving as a cautionary tale for generations to come, a reminder that unchecked envy and the pursuit of beauty at any cost can lead to a fate worse than death, a fate of eternal torment and a beauty that hides a heart forever tarnished by darkness. Today marks exactly 3 decades. Yet the memory remains as vivid as if it occurred just yesterday. It was my inaugural assignment following my return from the Vatican. A summons led me to aid a young girl in the quaint village of Oakshade. Following consultations with the Keller family, the time has come for me to fulfill my duties. My heart pounded against my ribs as I stood before her door. A sense of foreboding gripped me, but I knew there was no turning back now. The door creaked open, revealing a scene that twisted my gut into knots. The room pulsed with a palpable malevolence, its very walls seeming to ooze with a darkness that clawed at my senses. My eyes locked on Samantha, a poor girl tied to a chair, her body twisting and contorting in unnatural ways, as if her bones were made of rubber. Her eyes gleamed with a sinister intelligence, a window into the pits of hell itself. Stepping into the room, I was consumed by the oppressive atmosphere. My crucifix bore down on my palm, its presence a stark reminder of the divine weapon I wielded in this unholy battlefield. Samantha's body jerked and spasmed, her joints popping with sickening cracks in harmony with the chorus of pain that filled the room. A frigid gust swept through, sending a shiver down my spine. The air itself seemed to warp, as if the very fabric of reality strained under the weight of the entity's presence. The room was saturated with a putrid stench, a noxious blend of decay and sulfur that swore to suffocate me. Samantha's voice emerged as a violent growl that echoed from the very depths of damnation. The walls fractured and splintered, unable to endure the overwhelming ominous aura that radiated from her. The exorcism rites tore from my throat, a desperate battle cry against the encroaching darkness. Samantha's body jerked with increasing violence as the holy water burned her skin, her groans devolving into a fading echo as the exorcism ritual pressed its assault against the sinister entity. Bloodshot whites replaced her eyes as her head twisted in an unholy arc, bones contorting beyond the limits of human anatomy. Her mouth stretched open inhumanely wide, and a wail of anguish erupted from her, a sound that seemed to split the very walls. Against the tide of unspeakable horror, I battled on, my voice cut through the discord like a blade, my incantations an unyielding defiance against the vile demon. I clung to the holy cross, its pulsating energy resonating with my desperate determination. Samantha's body thrashed and writhed, her form twisting in grotesque defiance of its natural limits. A haunting symphony of shattering bones, rending muscles, and hateful cries filled the room. Each agonizing note resonated with a painful truth, the audible manifestation of the battle being waged within Samantha's tormented form. The chilling melody struck a chord within me, a heartbreaking reminder of the depth of suffering that gripped her and the fierce struggle that sought to free her from demonic clutches that had taken hold. As the tumultuous battle reached its climax, Samantha's body suddenly went limp, collapsing against the restraints that held her. Silence engulfed the room, broken only by the sound of labored breathing. Trembling, I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest as I surveyed the aftermath of the violent struggle. The room was a scene of devastation, the walls shattered and scorched by the demonic force. The remnants of the intense struggle I had borne witness to echoed persistently within the corridors of my mind. Each anguished cry and contortion of Samantha's body had left an indelible mark on my soul. The malevolent entity had receded, but its presence still whispered in the fringes of my senses. Walking away, a somber understanding settled within me. The battle waged against the darkness was a testament to human resilience, but it was also a somber testament to the insidious nature of evil. The feeling of triumph mingled with a sobering truth. I had merely forced the entity into temporary retreat. The struggle against evil was not a finite endeavor. It was an ongoing crusade, a perpetual dance between light and darkness. In the remote village of Oakshade, nestled amidst ancient woods and mist-covered hills, a darkness lay dormant. Unbeknownst to its unsuspecting inhabitants, an entity of malevolence lingered on the fringes of their reality, waiting for the opportune moment to awaken and unleash its sinister design. Samantha, a young and vivacious girl, possessed an innate curiosity that often led her to explore the forgotten corners of her village. Drawn to the mysteries that whispered through the trees and danced upon the breeze, she was a kindred spirit to the enigmatic forces that held sway over Oakshade. One fateful day, while wandering through the woods, Samantha stumbled upon an abandoned and crumbling cottage. Intrigued, she ventured inside, unaware of the ancient sigils and symbols etched into the decaying walls. These markings were remnants of a time long past, an invocation left by those who sought to bind an otherworldly being. The air within the cottage was thick with an unsettling energy, a palpable reminder of the malevolent entity that had once been tethered there. Ignoring the unease that prickled at the back of her neck, Samantha's fingers traced the patterns etched into the wood, her touch inadvertently rekindling the latent connection. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the woods, she ventured back home, only she didn't know she wasn't alone. A whisper, like a serpent's hiss, insinuated itself into her thoughts, weaving a tapestry of violence and sorrow. Night after night, the entity's influence grew stronger. It whispered in her ear promises of pain and suffering, of her worst nightmares becoming real. Gradually, the tendrils of darkness snaked their way into Samantha's mind, intertwining with her thoughts, desires, and fears. Visions plagued her dreams, twisted, distorted scenes that seemed both enticing and nightmarish. With each passing day, the entity's hold on her tightened, a relentless grip that began to warp her perception of reality. Her once vibrant eyes, full of love, now gleamed with an unsettling hatred and anger, a reflection of hell that had consumed her from within. Samantha's interactions with those around her grew strained. Her laughter turned to rage, her smiles replaced by expressions of contempt, disgust, and malice. These changes in her grew only stronger. The wellspring of hatred and fury within her soul gave rise to a violent force that left her loved ones deeply disturbed. The villagers sensed a growing aura of unease around her, but none could pinpoint the source of the change that had taken hold. Modern medicine couldn't be of any assistance to her. The intervention of doctors and the arsenal of medications they could offer paled in comparison to the insidious influence of the demon that held dominion over her. As the entity's malevolent presence took over Samantha's form, a diabolical union was forged. The once vibrant girl became a vessel, a conduit for the darkness that had long awaited its resurgence. And her eyes glowed with an unholy fire, reflecting the void that now thrived within her. A guttural voice emerged from her throat, a chorus of ancient tongues that defied comprehension. The entity aimed to tear apart her humanity, fully replacing her essence with its demonic nature. But deep within the recesses of Samantha's mind, a flicker of her true self remained, a fragile ember of resistance. Whispers of fear spread through Oakshade as rumors of the girl possessed by a sinister force took root. The villagers huddled in anxious groups, clutching amulets and crosses, praying that the darkness could be quelled before it consumed the entirety of their village. In the face of the unknown and the incomprehensible, Samantha's parents sought solace in church, in the rituals of faith, hoping that the age-old battle between good and evil would tip in their favor. Their decision carried the weight of desperation, a parent's love intertwined with the harrowing recognition that the battle ahead would be as much spiritual as it was physical. With a heart fortified by faith and a resolute determination to confront the demonic forces that had ensnared girl's soul, a young priest emerged as their beacon of hope. The tale of Samantha's possession rattled through the village. It served as a haunting testament that evil, once awakened, could insidiously manipulate even the most innocent and brightest of souls. And though the entity's hold had waned for now, its malevolence lingered, waiting for the next opportune moment to seize control once more. The summer was ending, and with it the nights got only colder. It was our last trip to the nature, so we decided it should be unforgettable. Our destination was a forest near the village, rumored to be home to supernatural, called Oakshade. The forest was dense, and the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth as we set up camp in a remote corner of the woods. We were a group of seasoned campers, unafraid of the eerie stories that locals told about this place. They spoke of an ancient curses that hung over these woods that would break the toughest and bravest of souls. But our determination was unwavered, and we moved forward with confidence. As night descended upon our camp, the towering trees loomed like silent sentinels. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. We gathered around the campfire and shared stories of horror, the feeble light barely pushing back the encroaching darkness. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of fear as I watched the shadowy shapes of the trees moving in the flickering light. I had heard the stories of the curse, and though I didn't believe in such things, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The forest was unusually silent at night. Crackling of the fire was the only sound accompanying our tales of dread until the faint, mournful cry of a baby broke through. We exchanged nervous glances, but none of us dared to investigate. The cries grew louder and more desperate, echoing through the trees and seeming to come from all directions. Panic set in as we realized that the cries were drawing closer, as if some malevolent force was heading straight for us. Then, just beyond the reach of the campfire's light, we saw her. A woman, dressed in tattered clothes, her hair matted and unkempt. Her hands were clasped around a small bundle which she held against her chest. Her eyes were glassy and hollow, yet they seemed to move with intent as they stared directly at us. It was as if she were a phantom from some tragedy that had occurred in these woods long ago. She approached our camp slowly, but without hesitation, her eyes never leaving us. The cries of the baby became louder and more intense with each passing second, until it filled the air with a hauntingly eerie sound. The woman's lips moved, but no words emerged from them. None of us could hear what she was saying, but the fear etched on her face was unmistakable. She extended her arms towards us, offering the bundle cradled in her hands. A wave of sheer terror ripped through us when we caught sight of what she was holding in her arms. It wasn't an ordinary baby. No. The baby was pale, its skin almost translucent. Its eyes were blacker than the night sky, like black pits of nothingness that could very well swallow the world. Its gaze filled with intent to cause suffering. The sound of its cries cut like sharp blades, like something not belonging in this realm. Its screams echoed like 1,000 tortured souls. We could feel the darkness seeping out of it, as though an evil itself took form of a child. We recoiled at the sight of the grotesque infant, its cries filling us with a terror that none of us had felt before. We stumbled back, our hearts racing as we struggled to comprehend what was happening. In a blind panic, we scattered into the night, leaving behind our gear and the cursed woman with her infernal infant. As we found our way through the darkness, its screams faded away until an eerie silence descended once again upon the woods. Eventually we reached safety, but the memory of that night still lingers on. We couldn't explain what we had encountered in the heart of those cursed woods, but we knew that it was a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred, and where the evil is still waiting for its opportunity to emerge. In the heart of the suffocating, shadowy forest where ancient legends murmured about a curse that had woven itself into the very roots of time, there lurked a tale as ancient and sinister as the gnarled trees themselves. It was a tale of a young virgin woman from a bygone era, a hapless protagonist in a tragedy that had left an indelible stain upon the very soul of the woods. Among the villagers, her name was uttered only in the darkest of corners, a chilling refrain of a tale untold. They recounted how she had mysteriously conceived and birthed a child, but this was no ordinary offspring. This infant, more a creature of nightmares than of flesh, bore eyes as black as the abyss, eyes that could pierce the depths of a person's very soul. Gazing into those abyssal orbs, the woman's sanity withered, as if she had glimpsed the very countenance of the devil himself. Misery and catastrophe trailed in the child's wake, a plague that seemed to thrive upon despair and chaos. In the village, affliction struck with malevolent intent, while death lingered in every darkened corner of their homes. It was as though the child bore with it an ungodly presence, a malefic entity that refused to be named. Consumed by desperation and tormented by her own offspring, the woman sought to rid herself of the wretched child, convinced it was the poisonous seed of their misfortune. She accosted strangers in the streets and ventured into the eerie woods, offering the child to anyone who would accept the sinister bundle into their arms. Yet, those who beheld the child were seized by an icy, bone-deep dread, fleeing in terror from its eerie aura. Even the sanctuary of the village temple offered no sanctuary, for she left the child upon its cold stone steps, pleading for divine intervention to sever the curse. However, when she returned to her home, her heart weighed down with despair. The cursed child lay once more in its crib, as though untouched by her desperate efforts. With each futile attempt to rid herself of this unholy burden, her desperation grew, and in her deepest despair, she came to a heart-stopping revelation. There existed but a single gruesome solution to shatter the chains of the curse. With a heart heavy as stone and tears streaming like mournful rivers, she journeyed deep into the accursed forest. Under the shroud of twisted trees and creeping shadows, she committed the unthinkable, extinguishing the child's unholy existence. Her heart, already fractured by the abhorrent deed, shattered further when she realized that the devil incarnate, though an unholy abomination, was also her own flesh and blood. As her tears mingled with the inky shadows of the forest floor, her own life drained away, leaving her to perish in solitude within the desolate wilderness. Yet, the devil within the child remained unvanquished, its vengeance swift and merciless. It cursed her in turn, chaining her ethereal essence to the woods that had borne witness to her vile act. Since that fateful day, her tormented spirit has wandered the forest, a restless phantom, forever branded by the malevolent curse. The whispered legend, handed down through the ages, dared to suggest that the curse's grip could be broken by someone, brave or foolish enough, to welcome the accursed infant into their life. But the same cursed whisper foretold that this selfsame act would usher the devil incarnate back into the world, bringing only calamity and darkness. In my youth, I wasn't exactly a role model, especially when I lost myself in drugs. I was down on luck, so I decided I shall take it from others. A scum, junkie, and a thief. That's what I'd become. I set my eyes on one house, big and expensive looking. For weeks, I'd been watching its lone resident, a man probably in his early 50s, a pedant and a man of habit. Every day, his program was the same. Leave at 9 a.m., come back at 6 p.m., leave again at 10 p.m., and return at 1 a.m. The neighborhood went completely quiet, well before 11 p.m., so that gave me enough time to do my thing. The day came when I was about to earn some dishonest living. The man came out of the house and entered his car at 10, per usual. I smoked a cigarette while waiting for him to get far, and then I jumped into action. I moved in the shadows and reached the back door. Over the years, I got plenty of practice, so picking the lock was not that hard and time-consuming. Entering a house, I felt unease, like never before. Every cell in my body was telling me to turn back, but of course I didn't listen. I was already in, so I might take a look. I ended up in the kitchen. Not many riches to find there. I roamed around the house and so far found nothing of value. The house looked ordinary but strange at the same time. There wasn't a single plant or painting, and it was all clean and tidy. Everything was organized, too organized, if you ask me. Not a speck of dirt anywhere. The house smelled of chemicals and something strange and unpleasant. The only valuable thing I found was a broken golden watch on the night table next to a neatly made bed. I took it and stashed it in my pocket, hoping it could be fetched for some decent money. I was disappointed. I thought it would be a more profitable evening. I continued roaming the house when I found a door, a locked door to the basement. Who locks the door to the basement in their house? There must be something good and expensive. It gave me much more trouble than the lock on the back door. After quite a struggle, I managed to open it, only to be welcomed by the sight of a short, empty hall. My heart jumped with excitement. I had heard about secret rooms and hidden passages, but I'd never seen one. I hastily got down there and looked carefully. I touched and pushed on the walls when suddenly a panel came off the wall, revealing another door. I didn't hesitate and opened them right away. My mind raced with thoughts of what I would find. Did I break into some drug dealer's home? Maybe he is a chemist cooking the stuff. The hidden room I stumbled upon in that eerie basement was like something out of a nightmare. It was a stark, sterile chamber, a place that felt like it had been torn from the pages of a horror novel. In the center of the room, there was a metal operation table, gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. It looked like something you'd find in a gruesome operating theater. On a smaller table nearby, an assortment of surgical tools lay neatly arranged. Saws, knives, clippers, scalpels, and other instruments of grim purpose. What truly sent shivers down my spine were the jars. There were dozens of them, neatly lined up on shelves that covered one entire wall. Each jar held a grotesque specimen suspended in a clear yellowish fluid. Inside these jars, I saw hewn organs, preserved with an eerie precision. Intestines coiled like snakes, kidneys floating like lilies, a heart frozen in mid-beat, eyes staring lifelessly, a tongue forever silenced, and hands contorted into unnatural poses. It was a nightmarish collection, a grotesque assembly of human anatomy that defied any logical explanation. The room was cold, devoid of emotion, and seemed to exist solely for one sinister purpose. The air was thick with the scent of chemicals, an unsettling combination of antiseptic and something more disturbing, something I couldn't quite identify. As I stood there, frozen in terror and disbelief, I couldn't fathom what kind of person would keep such a nightmarish chamber hidden beneath an ordinary suburban home. Amidst this gruesome display, there was a large freezer. My heart raced as I slowly approached it, fearing the worst. I couldn't help but imagine what horrifying secrets might be concealed within it. I grabbed the lid and slowly lifted. when suddenly I heard doors open. I completely panicked, preparing for the worst, knowing what would happen if he finds me here. I tried to sneak away, but he was heading straight to the basement. I did the only thing I could think of. I hid behind the door, and when he got near, I jumped him, pushing him with full force against the wall, and I bolted out the front door. I ran and ran. I kept running until I puked. On my way home, I was looking over my shoulder. Every random sound made me jump, thinking he's coming for me, but he didn't. I got home safely and called the police. I gave an anonymous tip, told them what I saw, and even told them the truth of how I found out. A few days later, I decided to take a stroll through his neighborhood. This time at daylight. Just a casual stroll. I was curious about what happened to him, or if the police even took my tip seriously. Apparently not, because to my surprise, the man left his house and started walking in my direction. The blood froze in my veins as he got closer, staring directly into my eyes. I could feel his murderous gaze. He approached me and told me he wanted it back. The watches. He told me it had sentimental value because he took it from his first victim. With icy sweat forming on my forehead, I played a fool and told him I didn't know what he was talking about and hastily walked away. As I walked, I heard him from behind. He just laughed and told me, "I know who you are, Mr. Jefferson Street." My heart skipped a beat as I heard him, for I really do live on Jefferson Street. The very next day, I packed my stuff and left the city. I came back home, a small rural town. I left behind my criminal and dark past, and I turned a new leaf. I got clean, got myself a decent job, and became a role model. But I never returned the watch. I kept it for myself, as a reminder to never go back down that path. I still vividly remember that crazy night from when I was 14 years old. It all started when my folks decided to head out for their anniversary, leaving me in charge of my little 7-year-old sister, Lily. They were planning on being out the whole night, so I had to take on the role of the responsible older brother. As the evening turned into night, I tried to stay awake, keeping an eye on the clock. Lily was sound asleep in her room, blissfully unaware of the world outside. The house was super quiet, with only the gentle hum of the fridge and the occasional car passing by, breaking the silence. My parents had drilled into me to lock all the doors and windows, even though our suburban neighborhood had always been peaceful. After that, I went straight to bed. Around midnight, I got woken up by Lily, shaking me gently. She had this look of sheer terror in her big brown eyes and whispered that someone was repeatedly ringing our doorbell. That was odd, and a sense of dread washed over me. It was way too late for any visitors. As I barely dragged myself out of bed, trying to shake off my drowsiness, I heard the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. My heart went into overdrive, and the creeping footsteps in the hallway didn't help my nerves. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Our home was being invaded. Calling 911 was out of the question. The landline was in the living room, and I wasn't about to venture out there. I grabbed Lily's hand and ushered her into the closet, desperately trying to keep her quiet as she clung to me, trembling like a leaf. The footsteps were getting closer, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I strained my ears, hoping to catch what the intruders were saying, but their voices were hushed and muffled. It felt like they were right outside the closet door, just when it seemed like our hiding spot would be discovered. A miracle happened. Our neighbor, Mr. Anderson, burst into the house. He'd been awake and heard the glass break, so he decided to check things out. The intruders must have freaked out when they heard him and bolted. Slow, sneaky footsteps turned loud and rushed. Then, in the dark, we heard a single gunshot. Lily and I clung to each other, tears streaming down our faces. We knew someone had been hurt, and the terror of it all was suffocating. A while later, we heard the screech of tires, hoping the two guys had made a run for it. We stayed put, not daring to leave the closet just yet. The silence was unbearable, and our muffled sobs were the only sounds, until we heard our neighbor cry in pain. I must check on Mr. Anderson. He needs my help. I told Lily to stay put and be brave. Slowly, I ventured out of the closet, my heart still racing, and got into hallway. What I saw gave me chills. Mr. Anderson was on the floor, blood seeping from a gunshot wound. Panic coursed through me as I dialed 911, trying my best to keep my voice steady. I grabbed a pile of clean towels, hoping to stop the bleeding as best I could. The minutes felt like hours as I waited for help. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. It felt like an eternity, but eventually, the paramedics arrived and rushed Mr. Anderson into an ambulance. The police were called, and they quickly got in touch with my parents, who rushed home in shock and disbelief. Mr. Anderson pulled through, but the bad guys were never caught. It was a night that left scars on all of us. Lily and I discovered what it meant to be truly brave, and Mr. Anderson's selflessness is something I'll never forget. In the moon's pale glow, where darkness blends, a realm of mystery where fear ascends. Through the veils of night, I softly glide, a spectral wanderer, forever untied. Beneath the stars' gaze, my presence shrouds. I dance on whispers through midnight clouds. In hidden depths where shadows conspire, I roam, unseen, like a ghostly liar. A phantom painter, I sketch my fears upon the canvas of your trembling tears. In the labyrinth of dreams and dread, I cast my spell, a haunting thread. With every heartbeat my essence grows, a symphony of horrors the darkness knows. In silent steps, I draw near and near, a nameless terror you can't revere. Through haunted echoes and ancient sighs, I linger, unseen, where sorrow lies. In moonlit halls, my spectre glows, a spirit searching where torment flows. With every step you take in dread, I'll lead you deeper where fears are fed. Through haunted whispers and eerie moans, enjoy the darkness until the dawn. I seek the secrets buried deep in the souls of those who cannot sleep. In deepest slumber, I find my prize, a harvest of fears, a dark reprise. The night will pass and dawn will break, but you'll forever carry the ache. For in the shadows, I'll always remain, a haunting presence, a never-ending bane. So heed this warning, mortal dear. The shadow's grasp. You can't adhere. For I'm the phantom, never ceased. A spectral soul, the night's dark priest. Embrace the terror, fear's delight. For in the shadows, you'll take fright. The dread you crave, the horror's tale. All of your nightmares, just under my veil.